Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, Tom Bevan. Tom, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be with you, Brittany.
As we sit here right now, we are less than 6 months away from the 2024 presidential election, and an alarming new poll for President Biden came out just a few days ago. A New York Times Siena poll shows former President Trump beating President Biden in 5 out of 6 battleground states. What are your main takeaways from this poll?
Well, obviously, this is where the election is going to be decided. I call them the Big Seven, but you can say there are 6 if you want to exclude North Carolina. But look, this is very similar to the New York Times' finding 6 months ago. They did a similar poll in November, and despite the fact that Trump's been on trial and Biden had a good State of the Union and has been hitting the campaign trail, these numbers really haven't improved for Joe Biden. It's the same story. Inflation is really, really hurting folks in these battleground states. And when you dig into the numbers, the problem for Biden is Trump is doing really, really well among young voters and among Hispanics and Black voters. And those are 3 really, really important pieces of Biden's coalition. And they are not on board with him now. He's got 6 months to win them back, but he certainly has a lot of work to do.
I want to break down why former President Donald Trump is gaining momentum when it comes to these demographics. This poll found that President Trump and President Biden are essentially tied when it comes to voters under 30 and Hispanic voters, and the former president also has over 20% of support of Black voters. So why is Trump seeing more success in these demographics, more so than he saw even in 2020?
I think it is. It's more about class than identity. Right? Typically, the economy is by far the number one issue, inflation in particular, and it's hurting working class people of all colors, of all shapes and sizes. And Biden is now the incumbent, and he's had 4 years to do the job. People are not satisfied with, despite the fact, and this is part of the problem, right? The administration continues to tout the good numbers on, for example, the unemployment rate or the stock market. And these are, in many ways, abstractions to people. While it is true those are good numbers, and Biden likes to say, well, we have a really robust economy. The problem is, for people who are living in their everyday lives, it's the price of a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk or what their mortgage rate is or what their interest rate on their credit cards are. And so by those metrics, people are really upset with Biden. They don't feel like he's done a good job. And they're looking back at Trump with some nostalgia and saying, look, things were better under Trump. And I'm sure they're forgetting about all of the baggage that came with Donald Trump. And Joe Biden is certainly, the Biden campaign's job is to remind them of that and try and make this a binary choice between the two, and hope that enough people would rather stick with Biden than go back with Trump. But right now, people are looking rather fondly about the economy under Donald Trump.
Some Democrats I've talked to have said the economy is doing well, but there is lag time, about 6 months, 8 months lag time for people to feel it. Do you think that's enough time for these numbers to change, especially for Biden, especially in these key states?
I don't. We're getting to the point now where people are, a lot of this stuff gets, as they say, baked in the cake, right? Impressions about the economy are going to be formed. They're hardening. And remember, the election's 6 months away, but in a lot of states, people are going to start voting weeks before that, in some cases a month before that. And so they really are running out of time. And again, a good unemployment number is not nearly as important as getting a good reading on inflation. And the last few readings we've had on inflation have been bad. They've been pretty awful. And so that's why I think, Biden is, it's going to be really hard for him to change minds unless there's some real improvement on the inflation front in the next few weeks. And that's a tall order.
Trump is leading in Arizona, Georgia, crushing Biden in Nevada by double digits, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So let's take a walk down memory lane, if you will. In 2016 and 2020, both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden were leading in the polls. Biden also won all these states in 2020. So knowing that, is this especially troubling for President Biden?
Sure. Yes, clearly. And, these are the states that, again, if you go back to the Big Seven that I mentioned, including North Carolina, Donald Trump won 6 of those 7 states. In 2016, the only one he lost was Nevada. And Joe Biden won 6 of those 7 in 2020. The only one he lost was North Carolina. And so it's one of those situations that with Biden behind this much, and you mentioned, again, if the New York Times poll showing Biden up or Trump up 13 points in Nevada, that may be a bit of an outlier, but it's certainly consistent with other polls in Nevada showing Trump with a sizable lead. I think his lead there in our Real Clear Politics average is approaching 6 or 7 percentage points. So you really do see the Sun Belt is kind of getting away from Biden, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, where he's closest within a point in our average, our Real Clear Politics average, is in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and he's at about trailing Trump by about a point in Pennsylvania. If he can win all 3 of those blue wall states in the upper Midwest, he'd win this election 270 to 268. It would be that close, but it's looking like more and more that's his path, and it's getting kind of narrow because some of these other states, as I mentioned, are starting to get away from him a little bit.
Why do you think the Sun Belt in particular is getting away from President Biden?
Yeah, that's a great question, because those are the states that have the most diverse populations, right? You got Hispanics in Arizona and Nevada. You got a huge African American population, which really helped him win Georgia last time around. And it's actually the states that are more white where Biden is closest. And so you're going to see, we've already seen the Biden campaign just launched $140 million ad buy to target rural voters in the upper Midwest. So I think they are also seeing that's really going to be their most realistic path to get to 270 electoral votes. But I think it's the economy. I mean, I just think with inflation and with housing costs, it's very, very difficult for people who to make do. Even people who are making over $100,000 a year are having to pinch pennies. They're not able to go out to eat as much. It's a really tough economic environment. And again, that cuts across all demographics, all racial lines, and it just becomes more of a class issue.
I know you mentioned earlier that there does, based on this poll, seem to be Trump nostalgia for the economy. As we sit here right now, he is currently on trial in his New York criminal hush money case. Does this poll show that his legal issues don't matter to voters or don't matter just yet?
That is a great question. That remains to be seen. There is some data in some of the polls that show that if Trump is convicted of any of these charges, not just in this case, but in any of the other cases that are out there, that might be some sort of tipping point, particularly among independent voters. I'm skeptical of that. I honestly think, for Republicans, they all believe, or most Republicans believe, that none of these cases, none of these charges have any merit and are all politically motivated. And Democrats believe the opposite. They're all, they already believe Trump is guilty. That's again, baked in the cake. I happen to think, though, given how much attention these trials have gotten, that independents are pretty well informed and have already made up their minds about this. And so I'd be shocked if there were, a big number of independent voters, if Trump is convicted of, let's say this trial, any of these charges, that they're going to say suddenly, oh, well, because of that, I'm suddenly not going to vote for Trump. I just don't think. I might be wrong, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But I'm skeptical that that's going to fundamentally alter the landscape of this election right now.
I think that's really emblematic. Your point is, my office is in New Jersey, and we see the New York City skyline. So there has been a plane and a banner that has been flying by in Manhattan that says, "When you indict him, you unite us, MAGA," as he is in court. But I am curious, these polls have made headline after headline over the last few days. What do you think's missing from the national conversation?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I guess the main thing that I would say is, polls are simply snapshots in time of where the electorate is, right? That is certainly, it's an important indicator. Polls this far out from the election typically aren't as predictive, don't have as much value. They will have more value as we get closer and closer to the election. But the other piece of an election is simply turnout. Which party can do a better job of finding their voters and getting their voters and their ballots to the polls? And Democrats have shown they have a much better handle on that over the last couple cycles than Republicans do. Republicans are still, Donald Trump is still, even up until a few months ago, was telling voters, telling his supporters, don't mail your ballots in. I mean, that you would show up on election day. And Republicans found out the hard way in 2022 that simply doesn't work in this day and age. All of the changes that were made to accommodate for COVID in a lot of these states, Republicans have been trying to claw those back and change those laws, as opposed to sort of playing by the new rules as they exist. And I think they've now shifted into that mode, but we'll see. They've got a lot of catching up to do. I think Democrats, that's the other piece that's probably not getting as much attention as it probably deserves, because I think Democrats have the advantage on the ground in a lot of these battleground states. And, that's going to count for at least a couple of percentage points in terms of what the final result will be.
We have a lot to look forward to in the next few months, including potential debates, the RNC, the DNC, seeing Trump's legal challenges unfold even more. What are you looking for specifically between now and Election Day?
Well, I'm going to look and see if there's any real movement in the data. Again, there's a general landscape of this election. The backdrop is pretty set, and we know what the terrain is. Now, that could be upset at any moment by an event. Terrorist attack, something that goes on, a natural disaster. I mean, who knows? Events will and often do intervene in elections. I mean, you look back to the, leading up to the 2008 election, that was all about the Iraq War until the Great Recession happened. And then it became all about the economy. COVID was, a crisis that was top of mind in the last election that no one really saw coming until, March of 2020. So certainly there are things that can happen. And I do expect that there will be a couple of surprises and twists and turns along the way. The irony is that, the primaries have been pretty sleepy. I mean, we knew early on from most of the data that this was going to be Biden versus Trump. So I suspect this general election has some twists and turns in it still. And that might come at the conventions. It might come after the conventions. It could be, one of these events that intervene. But I think, and it's hard to know what it's going to be, but I certainly expect that we will see a couple of those in the next 6 months.
Do you think the general sleepiness, to your point, of this primary season will affect turnout, and the fact that this is a rerun of something we all witnessed 4 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I've often said, right, this is a movie, we're getting the sequel of a movie we didn't even really like the first time around. Voters have made that clear in their expressions. They prefer different candidates. So, two things about that. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, but that would sort of indicate that there's an opportunity for a third-party candidate to emerge, right? This big opening for a third-party candidate to emerge. RFK Jr. is trying to be that candidate. It's not clear that he's going to get very far. He's at about 9% in our Real Clear Politics average of a bunch of national polls. So we'll see whether he is able to continue to sort of emerge and be a player in this election. But I think the other thing is, and this is ironic, because despite the fact that people are saying, look, I'm not excited about this election, or I don't like these choices, I think this is going to be a huge turnout election. I think both sides view the stakes as existential. Democrats are telling their voters, listen, if you don't turn out and vote, our democracy is over. And Republicans are telling their voters, listen, if you don't turn out and vote, we're going to lose America to the progressive left and this, whatever names you want to call them. And so both sides have ginned up their bases, I think, to the point where they've made this election into sort of an existential threat. And so I think, despite the fact that people are saying, I don't really, a lot of people are going to hold their noses. A lot of people are going to turn out and vote in this election.
Tom Bevan, I appreciate all of your insights. I appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
Great. Thanks, Brittany.